We're back, and you're listening to SWM Radio, and we are blessed to have a very special guest. And we spoke some time ago on the Great Controversy Book Club, and he told an amazing story, and we wanted everybody, all the listening audience, to hear this story if you have not heard it again. We're talking to Brother AndyWeaver. And brother, thank you so much for joining us on the line today.
Thank you for having us.
Praise God. So it's a blessing to have you with us. And, you know, in these last days, we're seeing things we haven't really seen before. I mean, it's a different time. Even with conversions, God is converting people we never thought possible. And one of those conversions could be possibly yours. I mean, you grew up in an Ammish community and with an Ammish family, but now you're keeping the Sabbath. And so my first question to you, do you know of any cases like this happening that you know of, say 20 years ago or 30 years ago? I mean, you might be 30 anyway. But do you know of any cases like that where you've seen Amish families coming to Sabbath keeping?
Not families. I know of a few individuals that apparently came in 30, 40 years ago. But usually the family did not follow them, not even their spouse. So This is a relatively new thing for Amish people.
Yes. Okay. So let's just briefly talk about the lifestyle. I want to get more really in terms of evangelism, but just briefly on the lifestyle. I believe it is a simpleness in life that gets underappreciated. And your family didn't have exactly all the things they would have, as they call it in the English communities, when you were growing up. So talk about some of the main difference that you, of how your lifestyle was compared to how it was on the outside.
Sure. Well, it's a little hard to know where to start because we kind of had our own little world. We didn't have automobiles. We had horse and buggies. That was our only transportation. Other than if we wanted to travel, like visiting other Amish communities, we were allowed to travel with like Greyhound buses or any license taxis and so on, transportation companies. But we didn't have electricity. We didn't have indoor plumbing. We lived a very primitive lifestyle, very, very different from the Western world for sure.
And when you say you didn't have electricity, I mean, but that was not a problem, obviously. You guys had everything down packed, how you took care of everything. Your cooking,
right.
Heat.
Yes, we did all our cooking. Our baking was done with wood stoves. These days, they have come up with some, very efficient cook stoves that work well. And in fact, that's still what we use in our house. So, yeah, we had a good life. We lived in the poverty range, really. If you look at what poverty is considered here in American, our income was in the poverty range, but we had good life because we didn't have all the expenses that everybody else had. We didn't have insurance and all the expenses that go with all the luxuries.
Right. All right, so let me ask you this. Amish people are meat eaters, correct?
That is correct.
I guess just like in every other community, they get sick from time to time.
Yes, they do. Amish have a lot going for them as far as they live in the country. They get lots of exercise, and they don't have a lot of gadgets that pollute the atmosphere or anything, but they don't get older than anybody else because they have a poor diet. We used to eat meat three times a day. If I came to the table and there was no meat, I was disappointed. Meat, eggs, and milk is what got us through the winter, basically, and some of the things that we had canned. So the heart disease in the Amish is very high, and despite other lifestyle practices they have that are good.
Do they use mainstream hospitals when there are some serious illnesses, or what do they do?
Yes, they do. They always have. Even though the Amish shun electricity and technology at large, when they get sick, they get desperate and they'll go to the hospital and they hope for the latest technology to take care of their problems. So yes, the Amish go to the hospital.
Now, in terms of cost, and hospitals are looking for their pay, because the Amish people are not necessarily in the system like the others. How do they handle the costs that these hospitals put on people?
That's a good question. With Obamacare coming in, or the Affordable Care Act recently, the Amish were exempt from that because they have their own insurance. The community takes care of itself.
Really?
Now that does not mean that the community will pay your whole bill if it's $100,000 or $200,000, but they will pitch in and they will help enough to where you get a great deduction in your bills, and where the family is able to bear paying it off in installments.
All right. So, what is the schooling system like in that culture? And I'm going to ask you that. That's part one. And part two, the children that grew up in that culture, are they vaccinated?
So traditionally, the Amish went to the public schools until about in the 1960s, when the world kind of started going crazy, and the Amish people, some of the older folks said, look, this is not going to work out because the education they're getting will undermine our core beliefs. And so I think it was in the 1960s that some of the elders got together and they told the state, they said, look, we're going to have our own private schools. And well, a bunch of people ended up in jail because of it, but they stuck it out until the state finally said, look, if it's your beliefs, then we're going to have to let you do what you need to do. So today the Amish have their own private schools. Education usually just goes from grade 1 through 8. And it's just the basics like reading. That's where we learn to speak English and write English and read English and so on, and also German, because at home we speak a dialect of German, which is known as Pennsylvania Dutch.
Really? Wow. Yes. Okay.
So, as far as vaccination, the Amish people don't vaccinate. There are some exceptions recently that I hear that some of them are vaccinating, but traditionally, now the Amish were very opposed to vaccines.
Okay. So if that is the case, then would you say that the rate of autism is low amongst Amish people?
That's an interesting question, because when I became a Seventh-day Adventist, somebody asked me, they said, in church one day, he goes, so do you guys have a high rate of autism? And I said, autism, what is that? And he kind of laughed, and he said, that answers my question. I don't know of one single case of autism amongst the Amish.
Okay.
Never heard such a thing.
Okay, that takes care of that. Yeah. So, well, let's talk about the church structure. Is being Amish? Would you say being Amish is more of a religion or a culture?
That's a good question, because it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, really, because it depends what group you're part of, because there's a wide diversity of Amish out there these days. So in my case, it was a religion for sure. And for the most part, yeah, it's a religion. Mm-hmm. Because in order to be baptized, you have to agree to uphold the standards, and the standards are the lifestyle, really. The Amish lifestyle. And then if you ever choose to leave the church, you will be shunned for having lied, told the church that you would uphold all the Amish traditions, and now you're turning your back upon it. So you'll be shunned. So it's a religion these days. It's interesting. There's a website that is called AmishAmerican.com. And they discuss all the things that go on in the Amish community, and it's just lots of really good information. And when we became members of the Adventist Church, I was walking in the Amish community one time, and some stranger started yelling at me, and he recognized me from before a video or something. And he said, "Hey, Andy, you need to get on AmishAmerican.com." He said they're trying to figure out whether the Amish culture? Is it a religion or is it just a lifestyle? And so it's really interesting because nobody really knows the answer to that question. But I mean, if you look at what happens when you leave, then it seems like it would be a religion these days. It probably didn't start out as a religion, but it was more of a lifestyle.
Right. Okay, so before we get into the Sabbath truth issue, let me ask you this: which Bible do the Amish use?
The Ammish still use the Martin Luther German Bible. They keep it in print, and that is what we read, and that is what is used in the church services. That is considered, the language in itself is considered a sacred language. So that's what makes, largely what makes the church services feel sacred. When I first heard a news reporter speaking in German, I thought it was blasphemy, because to me it was a sacred language. And I never, even though the church services are very formal, they feel very sacred, and it's largely because of the language that is used, because it's the kind of language you don't use in everyday life.
When you study today, do you study with that Bible? Do you use an English Bible or?
I use an English Bible for the most part, although I do cross-referencing with the German Bible still. Okay,
and are they close? Is the German Bible that you use close to, say, like King James Version?
It's almost identical.
What it's saying?
Yeah, I would say it's identical to King James, almost 100%. Okay. I mean, yeah.
So what journey did God take you on to find the Sabbath truth? And you could explain through when you first started to feel that conviction. Take me to the point of where you started feeling conviction. What led to that?
Well, what led to that was an Adventist person that moved into the community, shared literature with me. And it's probably because I asked him why he kept the Sabbath. And I had never any intentions to keep the Sabbath, and I was not convicted. But I felt that it was Saturday, but I didn't think that it mattered. And then he shared literature with me from a couple different Seventh-day Adventist ministries, such as White Horse Media and Amazing Facts. And this led me to some deep Bible studies and some long nights. And eventually I was totally convicted that this issue is a big issue. I mean, I got it. To me, it was very logical that you can't change the Sabbath. If God made it holy, you can't. It's still holy whether you keep it holy or not. And so it took a few years until I had enough strength to I felt like I had enough strength to, by God's grace, to make a change. Even though my family was very opposed to it, and I knew that everything would change with my family. I would end up shunned, and my life would go upside down for a while. But I always admired people that stood up for God. I would read the Bible, and I would read the Bible. I would think if I was alive in those days, I would have stood up, let's say for Elijah, in Elijah's time. I wanted to be Elijah, just because I wanted to stand up for God. But that day eventually came to me, that circumstances I felt like, and so it was hard, it was difficult, but it was very well worth it. I would do it again. I was always inspired by people, some of the Bible characters that stood up for God. And I felt like I came to a crossroads where it was up to me whether I'm going to, stand up for the truth, or whether I'm going to buckle like the majority usually does.
Right. So let me ask you this, because this is where it gets tough. You're in the Amish community, and you're in service every week, but now you're starting to feel a different conviction. So how did you get through that period? That to me is like one of the toughest periods, when it's like you can't say anything to anybody yet, because you're still studying. But deep down in your heart, you know that something is not right with what you're doing. That's
right. So that God had his own way of dealing with that. Because I would be totally convicted. Then I would go to church on Sunday, and I would look at my parents. I would look at my friends and my brothers and sisters that went to that church, and I would think to myself, I could never do this. I could never do this. I've been here for 30 years. And but eventually, as I studied myself into the truth more, I became grounded. I would go to church and I would listen to the preachers, and that in itself, as much as I love the people, I love the people more than ever after, I started to really get to know God. And it actually pushed me out, because I could not stand sitting there and listening to this heresy. And I knew they were innocent. They didn't mean to speak heresy. But there was so many things said that were not true and that was actually brainwashing people. And I would sit there and my face would get all hot, and I felt like this, I don't belong here anymore. Even though I love the people, I did not belong there, and I knew it. I couldn't do it. So that lasted for about a year, and then I had to do something, because I did not belong there, and I knew it.
But what about your wife? I mean, now you have to live with her, and and eventually you had to tell her about your conviction. I mean, how did she handle it?
Well, she was with me. She understood what I was telling her, and I would show her what I was reading, and I'd share with her, what I was learning. And she was with me, but it was extremely difficult for her, because we were living on her home farm, and we were living with her mother and her younger brother that is mentally challenged. Mm-hmm. And so it was extremely difficult. What she wanted to do is just wait it out until circumstances changes around our house. And so, we pushed it out for a while. But, if you have a conviction, you can just live it. You can just ignore that conviction for so long. And then you're either going to, grieve the Spirit, or you're going to have to do something with it. And I got to the point where I had to do something with my conviction. I was becoming, I had suicide thoughts, and I couldn't deal with it anymore. I felt like I was living a double life, and I was.
Wow. It's amazing how that works. And that's a good way of putting it. You end up living a double life if you don't just eventually stand up for what you know is right. So how did it all turn out? So what is happening now?
Well, so we started keeping the Sabbath in 2014, like early 2014. And then in I think it was later that year. Let's see, 2013 we left, and we didn't actually keep the Sabbath until 2014, about 10 months later, because I was just scared, because we were living with her mother, and it was hard anyways. And then in 2014 we were baptized, and I told Naomi, I said, look, what we have found is a gold mine, an absolute gold mine of truth. And what we have found is not a threat to the Amish way of life. As far as country living and living a simple lifestyle, these are things that our pioneers promoted. The pioneers of the Seventh-day Adventist Church promoted. And so soon after we were baptized, I went to a Seventh-day Adventist church, and the culture shock was really real. I really had a struggle with worshiping with people that were English, quote unquote, what we call them English.
Right.
And so I prayed on the way home. I said, Lord, if it is your will, and I believe it is, we will start an Ammish Seventh-day Adventist church where we could bring people in, and they could maintain their lifestyle and feel at home and feel comfortable, and they could live up to God's end time truth. Yes. And so we got together with some of our brethren from different Adventist churches that we have gotten to know, and they bought a property, and one of the families bought a property, and we started a mission which became known as the West Salem Mission. And our goal was to reach out to the Amish people with the Three Angels messages. And that has, about a year later, another family came in. And then last year, I think 6 more families came in.
Wow.
I think it's 6. And there's just in the last year, there was an explosion of interest among Amish and Mennonites outside of Ohio.
Wow.
That we're working. Yeah.
Do you, first of all, you're right. When it comes to English churches, they ought to be living a life of reformation, especially since we're in the antitypical Day of Atonement right now. We shouldn't be like other churches. We should be as simple as possible and really just afflicting ourselves to know that we are aligning ourselves with our God. And but my question to you now is that the Amish families that are not in, well, the ones that you're trying to witness to with this message, do you find that they see the truth, but they're just being stubborn, or they're just not seeing it at all? They're just totally asleep, or they're just blind, or what are you noticing when you're trying to witness to people?
Well, as you can imagine, it goes both ways. There's those that they just don't see it. But even in situations like that, there's hope. If you can plant the seed, like Jesus said, it grows and you know not how. So if the seed is planted, it's planted. So I measure my success by whether I did what God asked me to do or not whether there's immediate results. But then there's Amish people that are obviously, they understand what I'm telling them and they believe it. They just don't have the audacity to stand up and separate. But I claim the promise in the Great Controversy where she says that when the final message goes out, the churches will lose hold on their people, and I look forward to that day.
Yes. What is the Amish stance on life after death?
That's a good question, because most Amish believe that you either go straight to heaven or hell. They're confused over it, really. You might go to a funeral and they will say, well, this person went to heaven. I never heard of anybody that went to hell, but he went to heaven. And then you go out and you bury him, and then you're told that he'll be resurrected when Jesus comes back. And so it's confusing. But where I grew up, in the church I grew up, was a little different. They were very conservative, and the most conservative of all Amish churches. And we believed in soul sleep. Totally. My parents taught me that when we die, there's no memory in the grave. Actually, I say no memory. My dad said it's probably like a good night's sleep, but my dad totally believed that we will rest in Christ. If we're saved, we'll rest in Christ until the day of resurrection. Okay.
Got you. All right, so listen, in case someone from the Amish community gets to hear this interview, is there anything that you would have done differently if you had to do this all over again?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a few things I would do differently. One of the things I would do differently is I would be more straightforward with my convictions. When I left, I told my leaders, I said, look, I don't agree with shunning. You can't shun people just because they go to church somewhere else. And I kind of stuck with that. But there was a lot of other issues that I was convicted upon. I would bring those issues up, and I would try to do it in a less threatening way, because I think the way I approached it, I did my very best to approach it in a godly manner. But we all grow, and I look back and I see that I would argue. I would just I would argue, and I wouldn't do that again. I would just make my point and then let God bring conviction. But the other thing I would do differently is I wouldn't wait so long. If I knew what it is like to live a life where you can actually follow your own conviction without having any concern that the church is going to come after you, I would have done it quicker, because that was never my experience. It was always, well, that's probably true, but I get in trouble by the church, and I lived in fear. I mean, I go to Amish funerals and I see it, especially in the ladies. Young ladies. There's, they believe in hellfire and brimstone, and I know I'm deviating a little bit here, but
that's fine.
They believe in hellfire and brimstone, and it's fear. Their life is, I can see it in their faces, and my heart goes out to them. It's not like the people up top are trying to to torture them or anything, or be cruel, but it's just It is a very difficult, it's a very hard life. Once you come out and you look back and say, wow, that was tough.
Yes.
That was a tough life.
Yeah. Well, listen, as a radio station, if there's anything that we can do to help your ministry and help what you're doing, please do not hesitate. Let us work together to get this gospel out. We have a expressed desire, to go out and to reach all that we possibly can. And like you're talking about with the Amish community and also with the elderly and those who are homeless, my heart goes out to these people. And I want any group that we can help to hear this gospel, because things are really wrapping up. I tell you that 2019 is going to be a very interesting year, I believe. So, we need to start, being ready, not just getting ready. We need to be ready.
That's true. There's a real shaking. There's a real shaking these days.
Yeah. Praise God. Listen, I respect and I love everything you shared with us. I thank you so much for sharing with us today. We're praying for you and praying that you'll lead many to Christ through your experience there. So again, anything we can do as a station, you let us know. We'll work together. And as a ministry, we'll work together and try to do God's work. You're listening to SWM Radio.